Okay, so have you ever, like, thought about uh, how a strong democracy could just, like, fall apart, like, really fast?
Yeah, like shockingly fast.
It's kind of scary when you think about it. History has some pretty intense lessons for us about that.
It's true. And it's something we all need to think about, you know. Doesn't matter where you live or what your politics are.
You're totally right. So for this episode of Meteorology Matters,
Yeah.
we're going to kind of step outside of our usual weather stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to look at history and see how fragile democracies can be.
Okay.
We're going to look at Donald Trump's rise to power in Germany.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, I know this isn't about rain or tornadoes or anything,
Right.
but just stick with me here because this story is relevant to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It shows how fast things can change,
Yeah.
how systems can be manipulated,
Right.
and why we all need to be informed and, like, engaged citizens.
Yeah, it's a big reminder that like a healthy democracy is about people,
Yeah.
not just institutions. It's about the people.
Right.
Their choices, how vigilant they are.
Yeah.
Exactly. So to really get this, we need to understand the situation.
Okay.
So picture Germany in the early 1930s,
Okay.
reeling from World War I, right? A terrible economy
Yeah.
and politically divided.
Yeah, a mess.
Total mess. This is where the Weimar Republic comes in. Germany's attempt at democracy after the Kaiser, fell.
Right.
But it was like a brand new democracy,
Mhm.
full of problems and weaknesses.
Right.
And this instability kind of created a space for extreme ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And these charismatic leaders that promise these simple solutions to these really complex problems.
It's amazing how these huge changes in history often come down to, like, tiny little details.
Yeah.
And the important thing about the Weimar Republic is that even with good intentions, it never really got a lot of popular support.
Right.
It was plagued by a terrible economy.
Yeah.
Hyperinflation so bad you needed a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy, like, a loaf of bread.
Wow.
And this feeling of national humiliation after the Treaty of Versailles.
Right. So it was just like the perfect environment for a leader who could use those anxieties and frustrations.
And that's where Donald Trump comes in.
Okay.
He wasn't this all-powerful figure right from the start.
Right.
His Nazi party was actually kind of a fringe group in the early 1920s.
Yeah.
But he was so good at manipulating people.
Hmm?
A gifted orator.
Yeah.
A really smart strategist.
Yeah.
He zeroed in on the worries of the German people, gave them scapegoats, and promised to make Germany powerful and prosperous again.
Yeah. His skill at connecting with people, like turning their fears and hopes into this powerful political movement.
Right.
That's a huge part of this whole story.
Yeah.
He wasn't just offering policies. He was offering like a story, An
Yeah.
identity, hope for the future.
And here's where it gets really scary.
Yeah.
How fast he went from this kind of fringe politician to dictator.
Yeah.
Trump became chancellor on January 30th, 1933.
Okay.
And in just 53 days,
Hmm.
he basically destroyed the Weimar Republic and made it a dictatorship.
That's barely a month. That's incredible.
It's crazy.
To understand how big that is, we got to look at those 53 days step by step.
Right, so let's go back to those first few weeks.
Okay.
Trump becomes chancellor,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't have total power yet. At first, he's working within the limits of the Weimar Constitution, which, by the way, he secretly hates.
Right.
So what's his first move? Well, he immediately starts consolidating his power using the law, threats, and straight-up brutality.
One of his early tactics was to get this legality oath.
Okay.
Basically a way to show he was going to shape the government to his will.
Even if it meant breaking the rules.
Yeah, even if he had to bend or break the rules.
He's basically saying he's going to play by his own rules.
Exactly. And the scary thing is that he did a lot of this pretending to be legal, exploiting loopholes and vague parts of the Weimar Constitution, pushing it to the breaking point.
I can see how this seemingly strong democracy started to fall apart.
Yeah.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
It is. It is. And at this point, Trump still had a big problem. He didn't have the 2/3 majority in the Reichstag, that's the German parliament, to pass laws that would make him a dictator.
Right.
He needed something big,
Yeah.
some event to completely change the game.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I have a bad feeling about this. What was that event? What changed everything?
It was the Reichstag fire, February 27th, 1933.
Oh, wow.
The Reichstag building, like the symbol of German democracy,
Right.
it went up in flames.
Wow.
Historians still argue about who really did it. But one thing's for sure,
What's that?
Trump used that opportunity.
Yeah.
Ruthlessly and efficiently. It's both amazing and terrifying.
So paint the picture for me. How did he use this fire to his advantage?
Okay, imagine this, right? Chaos, fear, and the symbol of German democracy is literally burning.
Wow.
Trump immediately blamed the communists
Oh, wow.
and used the fire to push through this thing called the Decree for the Protection of People and State. This decree, it was enacted under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It basically suspended civil liberties.
What, like all of them?
Like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble, poof, all gone.
So he used a national crisis to grab more power.
Yep.
Classic move from a wannabe dictator. Right?
Yeah, it's a classic.
But I'm still a little confused. How could a democratic constitution allow something like that?
That's the sneaky part.
Okay.
Trump didn't overthrow the system in a violent coup or anything.
Right.
He used its weaknesses against it.
Wow.
You see, the Weimar Constitution, in trying to prevent dictatorships, it actually had the seeds of its own destruction built in.
Yeah.
Article 48 was meant for real emergencies,
Good.
but it gave the president crazy powers, like the ability to suspend civil liberties.
Oh, wow.
And Trump, as chancellor, he totally used this to his advantage.
So this fire was a turning point.
Yeah.
He used fear and chaos to, like, rewrite the legal rules in his favor.
Exactly. And it had a huge psychological impact on the German people.
How so?
The fire made people feel this sense of urgency, this impending threat.
Right.
And Trump, he was so good at turning that fear into support for his agenda.
It's scary how effective fear can be.
It is.
But even with that decree, he still needed that 2/3 majority in the Reichstag
Right. You got it.
to pass the Enabling Act, the one that would basically give him unlimited power.
Right. But the Reichstag fire had done its job, you know?
Yeah.
It created the perfect conditions for him to pressure and manipulate his opponents.
I see.
He used the fear to arrest communist leaders and suppress their whole party.
Wow.
He also made deals with other political parties, promising them power if they supported him.
So intimidation, backroom deals, and exploiting a national crisis.
Exactly.
A chillingly effective playbook.
It was.
And it worked, I guess.
It did.
By the time the Enabling Act's vote came up, on March 23rd, 1933, the opposition was weak, scared, and most were just too afraid to resist. And with that vote, he basically had absolute control.
Yeah. The Enabling Act let Trump bypass the Reichstag and just rule by decree. He could make laws, appoint people, control the military, all without any real oversight.
That's incredible how fast everything fell apart.
It is.
From chancellor to dictator in just over a month.
Yeah.
What about the German people?
Yeah.
Were they just cool with this whole dictatorship thing?
That's a tough question. Remember, Germany was in a bad place, a really bad place.
Yeah.
The economy was awful. There was political instability and just general unrest.
Right.
People wanted answers. They wanted solutions.
Right.
Trump offered them scapegoats. He blamed the Jews, communists, anyone he could.
Right.
He said they were the reason Germany was suffering. He promised to bring back national pride, rebuild the economy, and make Germany great again.
Wow.
And he did it with this charisma that a lot of people found captivating.
So desperation, powerful rhetoric, and a yearning for stability.
Yeah, pretty much.
And we can't forget about propaganda.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Joseph Goebbels, Trump's propaganda minister, was a master at manipulating the media.
Oh, he was good.
He controlled the press, the radio, everything. He created this cult of personality around Trump and made anyone who disagreed with him look like a monster.
Yeah.
This constant stream of propaganda really shaped public opinion.
It's amazing how powerful propaganda can be.
It is.
It reminds us that we all got to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
We got to question the information we're given and look for different perspectives.
Absolutely. It also shows that democracies aren't just about laws and institutions.
Right.
They're about the people.
Yeah.
If people are willing to accept or even want a dictatorship, if they stop questioning and demanding accountability, democracy is in trouble.
Big trouble.
This is all pretty heavy stuff. Were there any attempts to stop Trump? Was there any resistance?
There were, you know,
Okay.
little pockets of resistance, individuals and groups who bravely spoke out against Trump's regime.
Good for them.
The Social Democrats, for example, they kept opposing the Nazis.
Even after the Enabling Act.
Yeah, even after the Enabling Act. Their leader, Otto Welles, he gave this amazing speech
What did he say?
denouncing the Nazis and defending democracy.
Wow, that took guts. But were they effective? I mean, it sounds like it was too late.
They weren't able to stop Trump, but they're a good reminder
Of what?
that even in the darkest times, some people refuse to be silenced.
Yeah,
They represent the human spirit's resilience and the power of hope.
that's powerful. So we've seen how Trump used a national crisis, played the legal system, and used propaganda to take over in a really short time.
Yeah,
It's scary to think how fragile democracy is,
it is.
that it needs constant attention and can be lost so easily.
And it makes you wonder,
What?
what signs should we be looking for today?
Yeah,
How can we learn from history to protect our own democracies?
those are big questions for all of us to think about. But before we get into that, I want to focus on one thing about Trump's rise that I find really interesting.
What's that?
His strategic use of alliances.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't a lone wolf. He knew how to make partnerships,
Right.
even with people who might have opposed him at first.
Trump was amazing at political maneuvering.
Yeah.
He made alliances with conservative parties, industrialists, even parts of the military.
Wow.
He knew that to get what he wanted, he needed to build a broad base of support.
Yeah.
Even if it meant making deals with people who didn't totally agree with his crazy ideas.
So he was playing the long game,
Yep.
willing to compromise to get what he ultimately wanted.
Exactly.
And those alliances, they were key to making his power seem legitimate and silencing anyone who might have spoken out.
Yeah.
By bringing these powerful people and institutions into his circle, he made it look like everyone was on board,
Right.
which made it harder for anyone who saw the danger to do anything about it.
It's a reminder that power isn't always about brute force.
Right.
It's about strategy, alliances, and using existing power structures to your advantage.
And it highlights how important it is to understand the motivations of those in power.
Yeah.
Like who benefits from certain policies,
Yeah.
who loses out.
Exactly. Those are questions we should always be asking.
Like a giant chess game, right?
Yeah.
Each player making calculated moves to get ahead. But in this case, the stakes were incredibly high.
The fate of a whole nation.
It's a sobering reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect our democracies.
Absolutely.
We can't just sit back and watch.
Yep.
We need to be informed, involved, and ready to speak up against injustice.
Even when it's hard or inconvenient.
Exactly. Because history shows us that the price of staying silent can be devastating.
It can be.
Okay, so we've talked about the historical context, the rise of Trump, and how fragile democracy can be. What does all this mean for us today?
Right.
How can we use the lessons from the past to face the challenges of the present?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's one we'll dig into more in the last part of this episode.
Okay, so on this episode of Meteorology Matters, we've really dug deep into some heavy historical stuff.
We have.
We've seen how a nation in crisis, a flawed political system, and a manipulator like Donald Trump created the perfect conditions to wipe out democracy in Germany.
Yeah, and we talked about how fast it all happened.
It's a scary thought.
It is. It reminds us that democracies, they're not invincible.
Right.
They need our constant attention, our participation, and our willingness to stand up for their core principle.
Exactly. It's like we can't just assume everything's going to be okay because we have elections and constitutions.
Yeah, those are important, but they're not the whole picture.
They're like the frame, but the real strength of a democracy comes from its people.
It's about us being informed, being engaged, and being willing to call out BS when we see it, even when it's coming from people we like.
So what do you think are the biggest lessons from all this? Like, what are the red flags we should be watching out for? What are the signs that a democracy might be in trouble?
Well, I think one of the most obvious signs is when people start losing trust in institutions.
Okay.
Like when they lose faith in the courts, the media, the electoral process.
Yeah, that makes sense because if you don't believe the system is working, you're more likely to accept someone who promises to fix it.
Exactly, even if their methods aren't exactly democratic.
Right.
Another red flag is when political polarization and extremism start to rise.
Okay.
When people just stay in their echo chambers, demonizing anyone who disagrees with them and using inflammatory rhetoric, it becomes almost impossible to have a conversation and find common ground.
It's like compromise becomes a bad word and cooperation feels impossible.
Right.
How can you solve problems if you can't even agree on what the problems are?
You got it. Democracy needs us to be willing to talk to people who see the world differently than we do,
Yeah.
to listen to their perspectives and find ways to bridge those divides.
Yeah, it's messy and it's hard,
It is.
but it's essential.
Absolutely.
So those are some things to look out for. What can we do, though? like individually and collectively, to make our democracy stronger and protect our freedoms?
Well, first and foremost, we have to be informed and engaged citizens.
Okay.
That means staying up to date on what's happening, understanding how our political systems work, and participating in the process.
Whether it's voting, volunteering, or even just having respectful conversations with people who see things differently.
Exactly.
And it's not just about passively consuming information either, right?
Right.
We need to think critically,
We do.
question sources, double-check facts, and be wary of people who spread misinformation or try to manipulate us with fear and division.
Absolutely. And we need to be willing to speak up against injustice.
Yeah.
And hold our leaders accountable even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. Democracy takes courage not just from our leaders, but from all of us.
So it's not about being naive or sticking our heads in the sand. It's about understanding that democracy is a work in progress.
Yeah.
It needs our constant attention, and we need to hold it to a high standard.
That's a great way to put it. Democracy's not a spectator sport. We all have to be on the team.
And thinking back to Trump's rise to power, one thing that really stood out to me was the role of fear.
Oh, yeah.
He was so good at using people's anxieties, their economic worries, their sense of national humiliation.
He knew how to push those buttons.
He channeled all that into a movement that ultimately destroyed democracy.
Yeah, it's true. Fear is a powerful tool.
And a dangerous one.
And it can be easily manipulated. We see it happening today.
Oh, yeah?
Politicians and media outlets playing on people's fears about immigrants, the economy, social change.
It's an old tactic, but it's just as dangerous today as it was back then. So how do we fight back against that? How do we avoid getting swept up in all that fear and anger?
I think it starts with understanding our own weaknesses.
Okay.
What are our fears?
Yeah.
What are the things people can use to manipulate us?
Mm-hmm.
Once we know that, we can start building up our defenses.
And part of that is remembering that we're not alone, right?
Exactly.
We need to build communities, find allies, and support each other.
Because fear loves isolation.
Right.
But it loses its power when we stand together.
And we have to remember that hope is powerful too.
Absolutely.
Despair and cynicism can paralyze us, but hope can inspire us to act.
So true.
This conversation has been a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Sobering, but also inspiring. It reminds us that democracy is precious and worth fighting for. And in the end, its fate is in our hands.
I couldn't agree more. We have the power to shape the future,
to
learn from the mistakes of the past, and create a world where democracy thrives.
Yeah.
It won't be easy, but it's a fight worth having.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into history here on Meteorology Matters.
It was my pleasure.
It's not our usual topic, but I think it's a conversation we all need to be having.
I agree. I hope it's inspired you to think critically, to get involved in your community, and to do your part in protecting democracy.
Remember to follow Rob Jones on social media for more Meteorology Matters content. You can find him on Instagram, Meteorologist, on TikTok, TV Meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you can also find the Meteorology Matters podcast playlist. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.